All right, let's talk about Eastern African Islamic states and the Indian Ocean trade. Let's start off with the Indian and Persian sailors. They visited the African coast for the first time around 500 BC. Now, the Hellenistic or the Greek and Roman mariners also sailed the Red Sea to the same shore. And this is where they make contact really with, we see our civilizations of Eastern Africa, located like southern, eastern, all this region right here of Africa. So we do see there's outside contact that comes in and trades with these people. And again, these groups are also part of the Bantu migration in Africa, who migrated, as we talked about, into the area. We see the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, which we'll talk about a little bit, into this part of Eastern Africa. So in the 2nd century, the Bantus introduced agriculture, cattle herding, and iron metallurgy to Eastern Africa. They're able to found complex societies that are governed by local states. Most of this is Swahili society with Swahili languages. Swahili means coasters, referring to those who engaged in East African trade. And Swahili, again, is a Bantu language that has a lot of Arabic influences because of the trade with Muslim societies who spoke Arabic. In the 10th century, Swahili traded with Muslims to receive gold, slaves, and ivory and exotic products for pottery, glass, and textiles. So there was a trade we see through these societies here going all the way up into Arabia and far beyond, as we'll see in the video coming up. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the trade brought a tremendous amount of wealth to coastal Eastern Africa. The local chiefs increased their authority and influence by controlling and taxing this trade. The trade was most concentrated in cities like Mogadishu, which is located in modern Somalia today, right up here. Also Lamu, Maladina, Mombasa, Zanzibar, Kilwa, and Mozambique. Most of those, again, located around this region of Eastern Africa. All right, another major city was Sofala, which developed into another powerful city-state for trade. In the 12th century, the African societies start building larger buildings made out of coral, which is nearby in the ocean. And by the 15th century, the main towns had stone mosques and public buildings. The ruling elites and wealthy merchants, they were able to dress in silk and fine cotton, and had porcelain tableware that came all the way from China, which shows you the extent of this Indian basin trade network that went into Africa. The best known kingdom at this time was Zimbabwe, or Great Zimbabwe. And Great Zimbabwe today is really known for the huge stone wall structures that exist there. There were stone walls that were 5 meters thick and 10 meters tall. In the 15th century, about 18,000 people lived in Great Zimbabwe. Some estimates have it as high as 25,000 people living in this kingdom. Another major trade center was Kilwa. Kilwa was an independent trade center, like a city-state, and they also traded a lot with Zimbabwe, and then also with the Indian Basin, going out to other lands and empires. When trade came in, many of the leaders converted to Islam. Part of the reason why the leaders converted to Islam, because it made it easier to have trade and communication with the outside people who are coming into Zimbabwe. Right now, if you want to get more on Great Zimbabwe, I would click on the link, which is right over here. You can do that on the web page or on the PowerPoint, which are linked on my website, mrwoodworldhistory.wordpress.com. Let's continue and talk about social class in post-classical Africa. So, kingdoms, empires, and city-states had clearly defined classes. Some of these classes were broken up into ruling elites, military nobles, people who were in charge of administration, religious authorities, wealthy merchants, artisans who were kind of like craftspeople who made things, anything from chairs, bowls, etc. Artisans will make, or pottery. Business entrepreneurs, common people, peasants, and on the bottom, there were slaves. Now, in the small states, there was always a ruling elite, but for the most part, the social status really was mostly determined by kinship, by male, female, and the expectations of the genders. It's interesting to note that there was no concept of private property in sub-Saharan Africa. The villages that were there They existed of basically family groups. So you'd have like maybe 4 or 5 families in a village, large families, kind of like today, if you think of last names, like the Johnsons, the Greens, the Martinezes. They would be living in an extended family group, so each village would have like 5 or 6 large kinships or large family groups. The male heads of the families governed and organized work for their group, and some of their big jobs were to allocate or distribute communal lands and also make sure the harvest and all the crops were distributed to everybody equally. Workers with special skills were seen as being very important. Typically they were men, although there were some women who had special skills as well. Being a blacksmith was a very important job. And as we talked about in sub-Saharan Africa, that this is incredibly important because it allowed them to have weapons, it allowed them to have a plow, it allowed them for the agriculture, it allowed them to do slash and burn agriculture, which we talked about in West Africa, where they were able to plant trees, cut down trees, and then plant crops. The role of women. Women were in charge of domestic chores and child raising. However, women also were able to be merchants and were engaged in local and long-distance trade, even engaged in combat. Women sometimes even engaged in combat. Upper-class Muslim women wore veils and lived more secluded lives than the commoners. Muslim women in sub-Saharan Africa socialized freely. They worked very openly, and which was not permitted in many other Islamic societies. In fact, if we look at Ibn Battuta, when he comes and he travels through this area of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, he's actually offended by how much the women are able to be open in society and talk to men. Age grades arose early in the agriculture in the Sudan region, along with the Bantu migrations. Age grades basically meant that you had your group of people who were about your same age, you grew up with them, and you basically looked out and were responsible for each other. Age grades meant you did tasks according to your age level, you bonded with them, and you formed political alliances in a real tight circle. Age grades also aided members who were experiencing difficulties. Like a local ruler might see if someone's having a difficulty, he may talk to the people in his age grade and say, well, what are you going to do to help this person out? There were slaves in sub-Saharan, post-African, post-classical societies. Many of these slaves were captives of war. Many of them worked jobs like agriculture, construction, miners, and porters. Just like in Rome, just like in Greece, just like in many other societies we talked about, there were slaves, and again, most of them were captured in war. We'll talk a little bit about the religion in post-classical Africa. Africans did have many deities or many gods in their societies. Many people did, however, recognize a single male god as responsible for starting the world. Then they had kind of like deities or gods underneath that. Africans believed the souls of the departed had the power to shape events and give advantage to a descendant. There were many rituals that were focused on these gods and spirits of ancestors, and there was wanted to gain their will or favor, or there was a kind of a role of ancestor worship, which also was pretty common in other societies like China. What happens is, though, Christianity and Islam both come into post-classical African society. First off, Christianity. In the 1st century CE, immediately after Christianity begins, almost immediately afterwards, Christianity reaches into northern Africa. Alexandria in Egypt became a prominent center for Christian thought. Merchants were probably the first people to convert to Christianity. And then the kingdom of Axiom becomes like a major Christian center. The kingdom of Axiom is located in modern-day Ethiopia. And in the 4th century, Christianity gains hold, and the rulers of Axiom make it a Christian empire. In the 7th century, the ruling house of Axiom fell, and you have kind of a combination in that area now of Islam and Christianity. If you look back, we can see in the map there, we see, if you look in the area where Axiom is today, it's Ethiopia, we see both Islam and Christianity are there, and even some of the traditional religions that still exist. Ethiopian kings ordered the carving of 11 huge churches built out of solid rock, and there's a picture of that in your book. And these kings in Axiom said their line of kings came directly from Solomon of Israel. So this is one of the, we see the two pictures here. We see earlier we talked about and saw a video about the mosque at Jenne. Here it is right here, still standing today. That was built by Mansa Musa. And here we have an obelisk, a large tower, which is in the Christian area of Axiom in Africa.